The entire restaurant held its breath. Aria Brennan stood frozen, the crystal wine glass slipping from her fingers in what felt like slow motion. It shattered against the marble floor of Serafina's VIP mezzanine, the sound cutting through the elegant murmur of Manhattan's most expensive Italian dining room like a gunshot. Every head turned, every conversation died. Don Salvatore Marchetti, the most feared man in New York, the capo dei capi who controlled everything from the docks of Red Hook to the unions of Newark, stared at her with eyes like black ice. His hand, gnarled and liver-spotted, tightened around the ebony cane topped with a silver lion's head. The cane he'd used to break a man's kneecaps in 1987. The cane that had become as much a symbol of his power as the Rolex on his wrist or the scar running down his left cheek. She'd made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But not the one he thought. The mistake wasn't dropping the glass. The mistake was speaking at all. The mistake was correcting a mafia boss in front of his son, his captains, his entire world, correcting him in a language she shouldn't know, with knowledge she shouldn't possess, revealing herself as something far more dangerous than a clumsy waitress earning $9 an hour. The mistake was being born Isabella Vittorio, but that was October 16th, 2025, and the night was far from over. To understand how Aria Brennan, a nobody, a ghost, a girl who existed only in the margins of Queens, came to stand in the crosshairs of the Marchetti family, you had to go back 6 hours. Back to when the sun still hung over Astoria, and she was just another working-class kid trying to survive in a city that ate people like her for breakfast. The alarm on her phone screamed at 5:30 a.m., the same tinny, aggressive buzz that had jolted her awake every morning for the past 3 years. Aria's eyes snapped open, not gradually, not with the lazy stretch of someone who felt safe in their bed, but with the instant alertness of someone who'd learned that hesitation could mean death. Her studio apartment in Astoria measured exactly 380 square feet. She knew because she'd paced it out the day she moved in, calculating sight lines, escape routes, how many seconds it would take to reach the fire escape if someone kicked in the door. The landlord had called it cozy. The real estate listing had said, charming pre-war character. What it actually was, a box with water-stained ceilings, radiator heat that clanked like a dying animal, and neighbors thin enough that she could hear every argument, every television show, every moment of Mrs. Chen's insomnia next door. But it was hers. Or rather, it belonged to Aria Brennan, Social Security number 123456789, born April 3, 2001, in Dayton, Ohio, to parents who died in a car accident when she was 2. None of which was true. The Social Security number belonged to a baby girl who died of SIDS in 1999. The birth certificate was a forgery purchased from a man in Chinatown for $500. Money she'd scraped together by selling her mother's gold locket, the only thing she'd managed to grab from the burning ruins of her childhood. Aria Brennan was a carefully constructed lie, a performance she'd perfected over 10 years, a mask so complete that sometimes, in the seconds between sleep and waking, she almost forgot it wasn't real. Almost. She rolled out of bed, a futon on a metal frame from IKEA, and dropped into 50 push-ups. Perfect form, back straight, core engaged. Her father had started her on push-ups when she was 6 years old. 10 at first, then 20. By the time she was 12, she could do 100 without breaking a sweat. Antonio Vittorio had believed that a weak body meant a weak mind, and weakness in their world was a death sentence. He'd been right about that, at least, though all his strength hadn't saved him when the Marchetti family came. After push-ups came shadow boxing, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, the combinations her father had drilled into her in the basement of their compound upstate. That compound, 200 acres in Dutchess County, surrounded by forest, protected by men with guns, was supposed to be a fortress, supposed to be safe. The night it burned, 13-year-old Bella Vittorio learned that safety was an illusion, that fortresses could fall, that the people who promised to protect you could die screaming while you hid in a wine barrel and bit your own hand bloody to keep from crying out. 10 years later, the hand still bore the scar, a pale crescent on her left palm that she told people came from a cooking accident. People believed what they wanted to believe. She finished her workout with a cold shower. Hot water cost extra, and her budget didn't stretch that far. And dressed in the uniform of invisibility, jeans from the Salvation Army, a gray hoodie, sneakers with worn soles. Her hair, naturally a deep chestnut that caught the light like her mother's had, was pulled into a severe bun. The glasses she wore were fake, clear glass in cheap plastic frames, but they changed the shape of her face just enough, made her forgettable. Being forgettable kept you alive. On the wall above her futon hung a single photograph. Her father, Antonio Vittorio, standing in front of the lemon trees he planted at the compound. The trees he'd grown from seeds his own father had brought from Sicily in 1947, wrapped in damp newspaper in a battered suitcase. Those trees had been Antonio's pride, his connection to a homeland he'd never seen, but carried in his blood. He used to say the lemons tasted like sunshine, like the island his grandfather had described in stories told over dinner. Stories of honor and family in codes that meant something. The Marchettis had burned those trees to ash. Aria touched the photograph, a ritual, a prayer, a promise, then turned away. She had 2 jobs today. First, her morning shift at Queen's Self-Defense Academy on Northern Boulevard, where she taught basic techniques to women who would never need to use them. How to escape a wrist grab, how to strike vulnerable points, how to run. Always she emphasized running. Fighting was a last resort, something you did only when running failed. Her students didn't need to know that she could kill a man with her bare hands in under 10 seconds, that her father had made sure of it. They thought she was sweet, a little shy, good at her job but nothing special. Perfect. The academy's owner, a former police officer named Mike Donnelly, who'd taken 3 bullets in the line of duty and walked with a permanent limp, paid her cash under the table. $15 an hour for a 4-hour shift, $60 that went toward rent, groceries, the burner phone she replaced every 3 months. Mike didn't ask questions about why she needed to be paid in cash, why she never filled out a W-2, why she sometimes showed up with bruises she claimed came from sparring practice. In return, she didn't ask why his limp got worse on cold days, or why he sometimes smelled like whiskey at 8 a.m. Their unspoken agreement had lasted 3 years. After the academy, she caught the N train to Manhattan. The subway car was packed with the usual morning crowd, commuters with dead eyes staring at phones, tourists clutching maps, a homeless man sleeping across 3 seats while everyone pretended not to see him. Aria stood near the door, hand wrapped around the pole, eyes constantly scanning, looking for threats, for faces she might recognize, for anyone paying too much attention to the unremarkable girl in the gray hoodie. Paranoia, her therapist would have called it, if she'd had a therapist, if she'd been able to afford one, if she could have risked sitting in an office and answering questions about her past. Instead, she had routines, patterns that kept her safe. She never took the same route 2 days in a row, never ate at the same restaurant more than once a month, never made friends she couldn't walk away from. Loneliness was the price of survival. The train rattled into the station at Lexington in 59th. She got off, climbed the stairs into the October afternoon. Manhattan spread out around her, towers of glass and steel, streets jammed with yellow cabs, the smell of hot dog carts mixing with expensive perfume and diesel exhaust. This wasn't her city. She'd been born in the Bronx, raised upstate, belonged to neither place in nowhere. But Manhattan was where the money was, and money meant she could eat, could pay rent, could maintain the fiction of Aria Brennan for another month. Serafina occupied a 5-story limestone building on Madison Avenue, built in 1923 by an Italian-American architect who'd wanted to recreate the grandeur of the old country. The facade featured carved details, arched windows, and a massive oak door that required two people to open. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. The floors were Carrara marble imported from Vermont quarries. Everything designed to whisper, not shout, that this was where power dined. Arya entered through the service entrance on the side street, a narrow door next to the dumpsters that staff used. The kitchen was already chaos. Chef Massimo Di Napoli, a second-generation Italian-American from Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, ruled his domain like a tyrant. His voice carried over the clang of pots and the hiss of burners, berating a line cook about the consistency of a risotto. The man could make grown men cry over improperly diced shallots. Arya changed in the cramped staff locker room. 6 metal lockers and a mirror so old the silver backing had started to peel, into her server's uniform. Black pants, white button-down shirt, black apron. She pulled her hair tighter, secured it with bobby pins until not a strand could escape. Checked her appearance in the damaged mirror. Unremarkable. Forgettable. Perfect. Giancarlo Moretti, the floor manager, was having a nervous breakdown in the kitchen. His face, normally the color of expensive leather, had gone pale and waxy. Sweat beaded on his balding head despite the October chill. He clutched a silk handkerchief, dabbing at his forehead with shaking hands. The other servers stood in a nervous cluster, whispering. Arya hung back, a habit born from years of avoiding attention. But Giancarlo's eyes swept the kitchen and landed on her. You, Arya, come here. Her stomach dropped. Being noticed was never good. She approached, keeping her expression neutral, her posture submissive, the body language of someone who posed no threat. Giancarlo's voice dropped to a hiss, urgent and desperate. Do you know who's coming tonight? No, sir. The Marchetti family. He said it like an incantation, a curse. Don Salvatore Marchetti himself, and his son Dante. They've reserved the entire VIP mezzanine for 8 p.m. The entire section, Arya. Do you understand what this means? She understood perfectly. The Marchetti family, one of the 5 families that controlled organized crime in New York, with roots stretching back to Prohibition. Don Salvatore, who'd survived 4 assassination attempts and buried 2 wives. Dante, the heir apparent, who'd earned his position at 18 by leading a raid that wiped out an entire rival operation. The Marchettis, who'd ordered the hit on the Vittorio compound 11 years ago this October. The Marchettis who'd killed her parents, her family, everyone she'd ever loved. And now they were coming here, to her restaurant, to be served by the daughter of the man they'd murdered, the girl who'd survived their fire, the last Vittorio they'd failed to kill. The universe had a sick sense of humor. Arya forced her voice to stay level, curious but not too curious. That's quite an honor for Serafina, sir. Honor? Giancarlo's laugh was shrill, panicked. It's a nightmare. If anything goes wrong, if the wine is corked, if the pasta is overcooked, if someone breathes wrong, we're finished. Salvatore Marchetti once had a man's fingers broken for serving him room-temperature Prosecco. His son, Giancarlo's voice dropped even lower. Dante Marchetti killed a man for serving cold pasta. He was 19 years old and he shot a restaurant owner in the head because his carbonara wasn't hot enough. The other servers had gone silent, faces pale. Tonight, we are perfect, flawless, invisible. You are on water duty, Arya. Just water, sparkling and still. You pour, you refill, you disappear. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not make eye contact. You do not exist. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. Because if you mess this up, if you do anything to upset them, you won't just lose your job. You'll... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. The threat hung in the air, heavy and real. Arya nodded and retreated to the service station to polish wine glasses that were already spotless. Her hands moved automatically, the white cloth buffing crystal to a shine, while her mind raced. She should leave. Clock out right now, walk out the service door, disappear into Manhattan's 8 million anonymous faces. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to be anywhere else when the Marchettis arrived. But she needed this job, needed the cash tips that helped cover rent, needed the routine that gave structure to her life. And underneath the fear, underneath the rational voice screaming at her to run, was something else. Curiosity. She'd spent nearly 11 years hiding from these people, since that October night when she was 13. 11 years knowing they existed, knowing they destroyed her family, but never seeing them face to face. Part of her, a reckless, grief-poisoned part, wanted to look into the eyes of the man who'd ordered her father's death, wanted to see if he slept well at night, if he even remembered Antonio Vittorio's name, wanted to know if monsters look like monsters or if they looked like everyone else. So she stayed, polished glasses, checked her reflection one more time to make sure no trace of Isabella Vittorio showed through the mask of Aria Brennan, and waited. At 7:55 p.m., Giancarlo assembled the staff in a line along the wall, like soldiers awaiting inspection. Aria positioned herself at the end, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. The restaurant's main dining room had filled with the usual clientele: investment bankers celebrating deals, fashion executives discussing collections, couples on anniversary dinners who'd saved for months to afford Serafina's prices. They had no idea what was about to walk through that door. 8 p.m. exactly. The massive oak doors swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 6 men entered. 4 were clearly security, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing earpieces and suits that cost more than Aria made in 6 months. Their eyes swept the room with professional detachment, cataloging exits, identifying potential threats, marking faces. These were men who'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation. Men who saw violence not as a last resort, but as a tool, simple and effective as a hammer. Behind them came Don Salvatore Marchetti. He was smaller than Aria expected, maybe 5'9", stooped with age, leaning heavily on that famous ebony cane. But size didn't matter. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit tailored to perfection, a cashmere overcoat draped over his shoulders like a cape. His face was a roadmap of violence: old scars, a nose that had been broken at least twice, eyes that had seen every kind of human degradation and been unmoved by it. This was a man who'd built an empire on fear, who'd ordered executions over dinner and slept soundly afterward, who'd survived 4 decades in a profession where most men didn't make it past 40. And next to him walked his son, Dante Marchetti. Aria's breath caught despite herself. Where the father was diminished by age, the son was, she searched for the word, formidable. He stood 6'2", maybe taller, with a kind of build that came from real work, not gym vanity. His suit, navy blue, perfectly tailored, did nothing to hide the muscle underneath. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a Roman emperor. Strong nose, sharp cheekbones, jaw that looked carved from granite. But it was his eyes that froze her. Ice blue, shocking against olive skin. Eyes that missed nothing. Eyes that were currently scanning the line of servers with the same professional detachment as his security team. Aria dropped her gaze to the floor before those eyes could reach her, counted the white and gray tiles of the marble floor, focused on breathing normally, on keeping her hands still, on not shaking. This was the man who'd led the raid, Dante Marchetti, 18 years old at the time, who'd gathered 12 soldiers and driven upstate to burn her home to the ground. She'd heard his voice that night, muffled to the oak of the wine barrel, but unmistakable. Young, eager to prove himself, ordering his men to torch everything. And now he stood 15 feet away, alive and powerful, and completely unaware that the girl he'd tried to kill was close enough to touch. Giancarlo's voice came out as a squeak. Don Salvatore, Mr. Marchetti, it is the honor of a lifetime to welcome you to Serafina. Your table is prepared. The Don didn't acknowledge him, simply tapped his cane on the marble. Once, sharp and commanding. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent restaurant. The wine. Did you get the 82 Sassicaia? Yes, yes, of course, Don Salvatore. Giancarlo practically vibrated with nervous energy. From your private collection on Long Island. We've had it decanting for 2 hours, exactly as specified. A grunt. Not approval exactly, just acknowledgement. The procession began moving toward the VIP mezzanine, a private section overlooking the main dining room. But then Dante Marchetti stopped. His voice when he spoke was smooth, cultured, the kind of voice that came from expensive boarding schools and elocution lessons designed to sand off the rough edges of Brooklyn. Wait. Everyone froze. He turned to look at the line of servers, his gaze moving from face to face. When he reached Matteo Caruso, the head waiter who'd been with Serafina for 15 years, Dante's expression didn't change. But something in his posture shifted. A predator catching a scent. You're serving us tonight? Matteo puffed up slightly, proud to be singled out. Yes, sir, I am the head waiter. I will personally ensure. You smell like fear. Dante's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. And cheap cologne. My father has a migraine. If you hover over him reeking of terror, an Acqua di Parma knockoff, he'll lose his appetite. And if he loses his appetite, the unspoken threat hung in the air. Matteo's face went from proud to crimson to pale in the span of 3 seconds. I apologize, sir. It's genuine Acqua di Parma. I purchased it at. I don't care what you purchased it at. Get out of my sight. Matteo fled toward the kitchen, and Aria felt a surge of sympathy for him. 15 years of loyal service, dismissed in seconds because a mob boss's son didn't like his cologne. Giancarlo looked around wildly, panic rising. He needed a server immediately. Someone quiet, someone who wouldn't provoke, someone. His eyes landed on Aria. No, 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 no. Aria! He grabbed her arm, pulled her forward before she could protest. This is Aria Brennan, very quiet, very professional. She'll serve you tonight. Dante Marchetti's gaze shifted to her. Those ice-blue eyes swept from her scuffed black shoes, up her black pants, over her white shirt and apron, finally landing on her face. She felt the assessment like a physical touch, felt him cataloging details, the plain features, the severe bun, the cheap plastic-framed glasses, the way she kept her eyes down and her shoulders rounded to make herself smaller. Felt him dismiss her as irrelevant. She's shaking. It was true. Despite all her training, all her practice, her hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear of him, though she should be afraid, but from the sheer wrongness of this moment. Standing in front of the man who'd killed her father, who'd burned her home, who'd stolen everything, and he had no idea who she was. I'm sorry. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, the perfect pitch of a nervous server who didn't want to lose her job. I'll be fine, I promise. Don Salvatore turned slowly, his cane supporting his weight. He looked at her with those black eyes, and for a moment Aria thought he could see through the disguise, see past Aria Brennan to Isabella Vittorio underneath. But he just sniffed the air near her, an oddly animal gesture. Soap, unscented, good. His voice was gravel in a cement mixer, rough from decades of cigars and shouting. Let's eat. He turned and began the slow climb up the stairs to the VIP mezzanine. Dante lingered a moment longer, and when he leaned in close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive, cedar and leather, her heart stopped. Don't make a mistake. My father isn't known for his forgiveness. Then he was gone, following his father up the stairs, and Aria was left standing in the foyer with Giancarlo's hand still clamped on her arm. What are you waiting for? he hissed. The antipasto, move! She moved. Through the kitchen where Chef Massimo was plating handmade focaccia with rosemary and sea salt. Up the narrow service stairs to the mezzanine, into the lion's den. The VIP section was smaller than the main dining room, intimate and exclusive. A single table set for two, white linen from specialty importers upstate, silverware heavy enough to be weapons, candles casting warm light over everything. The windows overlook Madison Avenue, the city glittering outside like a promises it would never keep. 4 bodyguards positioned themselves at the corners of the space, facing outward, hands resting near concealed weapons. Don Salvatore and Dante sat across from each other, and the tension between them was thick enough to choke on. Father and son, Don and heir. 2 alphas sharing space, barely. Arya approached with the breadbasket, her footsteps silent on the carpet. She placed it on the table without a sound, her movements practiced and smooth. Poured sparkling water into the Don's glass, still water into Dante's. The twist of her wrist at the end prevented even a single drop from falling. Her father had taught her that. Antonio Vittorio, who'd believed that grace under pressure was a survival skill, who'd made her practice pouring water for hours until she could do it blindfolded, who'd said that the difference between life and death often came down to the smallest details. She stepped back into the shadows near the wall, hands clasped behind her back, waiting. The construction on the Jersey waterfront stalled. Dante's voice was casual, but his hands told a different story. He tore a piece of focaccia into pieces without eating any of it. The unions are asking for another 5%. Give them 2. Don Salvatore didn't look up from his wineglass. And break the knees of whoever asked for 5. Remind them who paved those roads. Risky. The FBI's been watching the union leadership closely since the indictments. I don't pay you to tell me about risks. The Don's voice hardened. I pay you to handle them. You've been soft lately, since Boston. A muscle in Dante's jaw jumped. I'm not soft, I'm cautious. There's a difference. Is there? The silence that followed was dangerous. Arya kept her eyes down, but she could feel the weight of unspoken history pressing down on the room. Whatever had happened in Boston, it had created a crack in the relationship between these 2 men. Cracks were weaknesses, and in their world, weakness got you killed. The first course arrived, carpaccio of red prawns with blood orange reduction and fennel pollen. Chef Massimo's masterpiece, the dish that had earned Serafina its 3rd Michelin star. The prawns came from suppliers at the Fulton Fish Market, the oranges from a specialty importer in California who dealt exclusively in Mediterranean varietals. Arya placed the plate in front of Don Salvatore with the same silent grace. Carpaccio de gamberi rossi, sir. The Don picked up his fork, examined the dish with the eye of someone who knew food, who'd grown up in a culture where meals were sacred and shortcuts were sins. He cut a small piece of prawn, dragged it through the reduction, brought it to his mouth, chewed, and spat it into his napkin. Garbage. Arya's stomach dropped. Papa, Dante's voice carried a warning. It's the best seafood in the city. It's wrong. The Don's voice rose, echoing slightly in the intimate space. They call this Sicilian? The fennel, it's pollen, powdered. But traditional method for winter uses preserved wild fennel from spring harvest, not powder. This chef doesn't understand seasonal preparations, doesn't understand tradition. He slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. The wineglass wobbled. I am tired of this city, tired of fake people and fake food that pretends to be what it's not. He turned that black gaze on Arya. You, girl, take this away. Tell the chef he doesn't know the difference between authentic method and shortcuts. Go. Arya reached for the plate. Her hands were steady now. The initial shock burned away by something else. Because the Don was wrong. Not about the food being bad. Chef Massimo's food was never bad. But about the preparation. Fennel pollen from summer harvest was the traditional method for winter blood orange dishes. Fresh fennel only grew April through June. Her grandfather had taught her father, who'd taught her. The old ways passed down through generations of Italian immigrants who'd brought their knowledge across the ocean in their heads and hearts. The Don was wrong. In telling a mafia boss he was wrong was suicide. But letting Chef Massimo take the fall, letting him be fired or worse for serving perfection, that was wrong too. And underneath the fear, underneath the survival instinct screaming at her to stay silent, was something else. Pride. She was a Vittorio. And Vittorios didn't let ignorance masquerade as authority, even when keeping quiet was safer. The words came out before she could stop them. With respect, signore. Both men's heads snapped toward her. She'd spoken, broken the cardinal rule. Waitstaff were supposed to be invisible, silent, forgettable. But now she'd started, she couldn't stop. The chef follows tradition. Wild fennel grows only spring through early summer. For winter blood orange, fennel pollen from last summer's harvest is the authentic Sicilian method. Fresh fennel in October would be wrong. The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of silence that came before violence, before blood. And then Don Salvatore's eyes went wide, not with anger, with shock. Because Aria Brennan, American-born waitress from Ohio, hadn't spoken in English. She'd switched without realizing it, slipped into dialetto siciliano, the old dialect of the mountain villages. The language her grandmother had taught her mother, who'd taught her. The language spoken by the first generation of immigrants before their children anglicized it into something smoother, easier, more American. The language that hadn't been spoken in New York's underworld for 50 years. The language that marked her as something other than what she claimed to be. What did you say? The Don's voice came out strangled. Not angry, shocked, maybe even afraid. Say it again, the dialect. Where did you learn to speak the tongue of the mountain villages? Aria's mind raced. She could feel Dante staring at her, could see his hand move slightly toward his jacket where a weapon must be concealed, could feel the bodyguards shift their weight, ready to act if their boss gave the word. She'd revealed herself. Not completely, but enough to be dangerous. My grandmother. The lie came smooth, practiced. She'd prepared for this, had contingencies for every scenario. She came from upstate, raised by immigrants. She was very particular about proper methods. Upstate, the Don's eyes narrowed. Where upstate? A small town. She never talked much about it, just taught me the old ways, the language, the traditions. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her grandmother had been from upstate, had married into the Vittorio family, had taught Isabella the dialect that marked them as old blood, as families that remembered where they came from, even after 3 generations on American soil. Don Salvatore studied her face, looking for the lie, for the crack in the facade. But Aria Brennan's mask was perfect, built over 10 years of practice, reinforced by genuine terror and desperate need to survive. Finally, he picked up his fork, took another bite of the prawns, chewed slowly, eyes closed. You're right. His voice came out quiet, almost defeated. It's fennel pollen, traditional. He opened his eyes, looked at Dante. I've forgotten. Age. Making me stupid. He turned back to Aria. You speak the old dialect better than my son, better than most men I know. This is unusual. For a waitress. Dante leaned forward. His eyes hadn't left her face. Very unusual. Where exactly did you say you worked before Serafina? I didn't, sir. Keep it vague. Don't give them anything to verify. Different restaurants. I move around. Why? I like change. It wasn't convincing. She could see it in the way Dante's eyes narrowed, the way his fingers drummed once on the table. A predator catching scent of prey. He pulled out a gold money clip, peeled off $500 bills, placed them on the table. For the lesson in tradition. Now leave us. Arya took the money with shaking hands, back toward the service door. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to clock out, to disappear into Manhattan's 8 million souls and never come back. But as she reached the door, she made the mistake of looking back. Dante Marchetti was still watching her, and the expression on his face wasn't anger or suspicion. It was curiosity, which was so much more dangerous. The wine cellar beneath Serafina smelled of earth and oak and secrets. Arya descended the narrow stone stairs, grateful for the excuse to escape, to put walls between herself and those ice-blue eyes that had studied her like a specimen under glass. Her hands still trembled as she reached for the light switch, illuminating rows of bottles that stretched into shadow, vintages worth more than most people earned in a year, dust-covered promises from vineyards in Napa and Long Island and the Willamette Valley. The Barolo 1996 sat in the Italian section, its label slightly faded, but the bottle itself pristine. She lifted it carefully, cradling the glass like something precious and fragile, which it was. $8,000 of fermented grapes that would be gone in an hour, reduced to empty crystal and a check Giancarlo would frame on the wall. Footsteps on the stairs behind her. Arya's entire body went rigid, the kind of stillness that came from prey animals when predators drew close. She didn't turn, didn't breathe, just held the bottle and waited. You move well in the dark. Dante Marchetti's voice filled the cellar, smooth and rich as the wine she held. He'd removed his jacket, and the white shirt beneath clung to shoulders that spoke of violence, kept leashed. The gun holster under his left arm was visible now, black leather against white cotton, no longer bothering to hide what everyone already knew. "The light's on, sir." Her voice came out steady, despite the hurricane in her chest. "Is it?" He descended another step, then another. The stairs creaked under his weight. "Seems pretty dark to me. Seems like the kind of place people go when they want to hide. I'm just getting wine." "Are you?" He reached the bottom. The cellar wasn't large, maybe 12 feet by 20, brick walls from the 1920s when the building had been erected. With Dante Marchetti occupying the space, it felt the size of a coffin. "I know something about hiding." He moved closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, could smell the cedar and leather, and something underneath that was just him. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, so quick she almost missed it, before returning to her eyes. A tell, the kind her father had taught her to read in poker games and negotiations. Dante Marchetti was attracted to her, and that was either a weapon she could use or a complication that would get her killed. "I know what it looks like when someone's running from their past, the way they hold themselves, the way they scan exits before entering rooms, the way they flinch at sudden movements." Arya forced herself to meet his eyes, to not look away like prey. "I don't know what you mean. You speak a dialect that hasn't been used in New York since my grandfather died. You correct my father, who has killed men for less, with the confidence of someone who knows she's right. And your hands," he reached out, not grabbing but hovering near her wrist. "Those aren't the hands of a woman who spent her life serving tables. They're too strong, too scarred. You train, hard. Why does a waitress need calluses like a fighter?" Every word was a noose tightening. Every observation a nail in the coffin of Arya Brennan. "I teach self-defense in the mornings at a gym in Queens. Truth wrapped around lies, the most convincing kind of deception." "Show me." "What?" "Show me." His voice dropped lower, almost gentle. "Defend yourself, right now." This was a test. Everything with men like Dante Marchetti was a test. And the only way to pass was to give him something real, something that satisfied his curiosity while protecting the deeper truth. She set the bottle down on a nearby shelf, turned to face him fully. "You want me to attack you? I want to see what you can do. You're my employer's guest. I can't. You can, and you will. Consider it a condition of continued employment." The threat hung between them, casual and absolute. Do this or lose your job. Do this or we start asking questions you can't afford to answer. Do this or disappear, and we both know what disappearing means when the Marchetti family decides to make someone vanish. Arya shifted her weight, centered herself. Her father's training rose up through muscle memory. 10,000 hours in the basement of the compound, learning how to read body language, how to exploit weaknesses, how to end fights before they began. Antonio Vittorio had taught her that violence was a last resort, but when it came, it had to be decisive. She moved, not at full speed, not with killing intent, but fast enough to be impressive, controlled enough to be safe. A step inside Dante's guard, low sweep toward his leading ankle, hand rising toward his throat in a strike that stopped 3 inches short. The whole sequence took maybe 2 seconds. Dante didn't flinch, didn't move, just watched her hand hovering near his windpipe, his gaze tracking every micro movement with predator focus. Your father taught you that. The words hit like a physical blow. She stepped back, pulse hammering. My father's dead. I know, I'm sorry. He adjusted his collar where her hand had been. But whoever he was, he knew what he was doing. That's not gym self-defense. That's real training, military or... The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the cellar. Not the gradual dimming of a dying bulb, but the instant blackness of a cut wire. Arya's hand went automatically to the small knife she kept tucked in her sock, fingers closing around the handle. Don't move. Dante's voice came from her left, no longer casual. All business now. Stay exactly where you are. Above them, muffled through brick and plaster, came sounds, shouting, glass breaking, and then, unmistakable, impossible to mistake for anything else, gunfire, automatic weapons, AR-15s by the sound, the rapid stutter of high-velocity rounds punching through wood and flesh. Screaming followed, the kind of screaming that came from people who'd never been shot at before, whose worst fear had been bad reviews on Yelp, and now faced lead and blood and death. Dante had his gun out. She heard the slide rack in the darkness, a round chambering. Stay behind me. Stay low. What's happening? Someone's attacking my father. He moved toward the stairs, and she followed because there was nowhere else to go. Because the only exit was up. Because running now would mark her as either coward or conspirator, and she couldn't afford to be seen as either. At the top of the stairs, Dante paused, cracked the door, light spilled through, emergency lighting, red and hellish. The kitchen was chaos. Chef Massimo crouched behind the stainless steel prep station, hands over his head. 2 line cooks lay on the floor in spreading pools of red, not moving. The gunfire came from the direction of the VIP mezzanine. Dante burst through the door, gun up, moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this before. Arya followed, keeping low like he'd ordered, her own knife now in hand because a 3-inch blade was better than nothing. They crossed the kitchen, up the service stairs. The gunfire had stopped, but the screaming continued, high and desperate. Smoke hung in the air, cordite and burning fabric. At the top of the stairs, Dante held up a hand. Stop. He peered around the corner, then moved, fast and silent as a hunting cat. The VIP mezzanine looked like a war zone. One of the bodyguards was down, a massive hole in his chest. Another had been hit in the leg and was applying a tourniquet with shaking hands, his face the color of old paper. The windows overlooking Madison Avenue had been shot out, cold October air pouring through the gaps, scattering menus and napkins like dead leaves. And at the center of it all, behind the overturned table that had once held $8,000 wine and handmade pasta, Don Salvatore Marchetti clutched his chest. His face had gone gray. Not from blood, Arya couldn't see any wounds, but from shock. From the heart that had been failing slowly for years now, deciding that tonight, under gunfire, was time to quit. Dante dropped beside his father. Papa, Papa, stay with me. The girl, Don Salvatore's voice came out papery thin. Where's the girl? I'm here. Arya stepped forward without thinking, dropping to her knees on the other side of the Don. Glass from the shattered windows bit through her pants. I'm right here. Those black eyes found her face. You knew. Before the shots, you grabbed the table. How did you know? She had. In the half-second before the windows exploded, before the world became muzzle flash and screaming, she'd seen it. The reflection in the wine glass, the laser sight tracking across the Don's chest, red dot dancing like a promise of death. And her body had moved before her brain could stop it, had launched across the space and grabbed the table edge and pulled. 300 pounds of solid oak, impossible to move. But adrenaline made people capable of impossible things, and watching an old man about to die, even an old man she should hate, had triggered something deeper than revenge, had triggered the code her father had drilled into her bones. Assassination is the weapon of cowards, and we are not cowards. Instinct, the lie came easy. I saw something move outside. Liar. But Don Salvatore's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Good instincts, better than my own men. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. NYPD response time in Midtown was under 4 minutes for shots fired. They'd be here soon, and when they came, there would be questions, statements, investigations, everything Arya Brennan couldn't survive. We need to go, now. Dante was already moving, phone to his ear. Rocco, I need extraction. Service entrance, 3 minutes. Papa's having cardiac event. We need the mobile unit standing by. A pause. I don't care about the police. Move. Now. He ended the call, immediately dialed again. Romano, lock down all entry points to the compound. No one in or out without my direct authorization. And I want a full accounting of every capo's location tonight. If someone tipped off these shooters, I'll find them. He pocketed the phone, turned to Arya. You're coming with us. What? No, I need to. You saved my father's life. That creates a debt. His hand closed around her arm, not bruising but absolutely firm. And you saw the shooters. That makes you a witness. Either you come with us voluntarily or we take you involuntarily. But either way, you're not staying here. The wounded bodyguard had managed to stand, hopping on one leg, weapon still in his good hand. He gestured toward the service exit with his chin. Boss, we gotta move before NYPD locks down the building. They moved. Dante supporting his father on one side, the wounded bodyguard limping on the other. Arya followed because there was no choice, because Dante's hand on her arm made it clear this wasn't a request. Down the service stairs, through the kitchen where Chef Massimo still crouched in shock. Out into the alley behind Serafina, where dumpsters overflowed and steam rose from grates. 2 black SUVs sat idling, engines running. Bulletproof glass, run-flat tires, the kind of vehicles that cost more than houses and could survive rocket attacks. The doors opened and hands reached out. More bodyguards, faces hard and professional, pulling Don Salvatore into the first vehicle. Dante shoved Arya toward the second SUV. Get in. I can't. I have to give a statement to. You want to explain to NYPD how you saw the shooter before he fired? How you moved fast enough to save a man from a sniper? How you speak Sicilian dialect and know fighting techniques? His voice was ice and iron. Get in. She got in. The door slammed. The SUV lurched into motion, tires squealing as it cornered out of the alley onto Madison Avenue. Through the tinted windows, Arya watched Serafina recede. Police cars already arriving, lights painting the limestone facade red and blue, uniformed officers pouring through the door she'd walked through 6 hours ago as Arya Brennan, invisible waitress. That person was gone now, dead as surely as the bodyguards left bleeding on the mezzanine floor. What came next, she had no idea. The convoy headed east, through Midtown, across the Queensboro Bridge, into the tangle of highways that led to Long Island. No one spoke. Isabella pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the city lights blur into streaks. She'd become so good at not feeling, at building walls around the grief until it was buried so deep she could almost forget it existed. Almost. But sitting here, in the enemy's vehicle, surrounded by the men who'd murdered her family, she could feel something cracking. A hairline fracture in the fortress she'd spent a decade constructing. She closed her eyes, focused on breathing, rebuilt the walls, brick by brick, before they could crumble entirely. Not yet. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. The driver, a thick-necked man with hands like hams, kept his eyes on the road and occasionally checked the rear view for tails. Beside Arya, Dante was on the phone, speaking in rapid Italian too fast for her to fully catch. Something about doctors, about lockdown, about finding whoever had ordered the hit. 20 minutes later, they turned onto a private road in Kings Point. The gate that blocked the entrance was steel reinforced and 20 feet high, topped with cameras and what looked like motion sensors. It rolled open as they approached, closed behind them with the finality of a prison door. The Marchetti compound sprawled across 15 acres of prime Long Island real estate. The main house sat at the center, stone and glass, built in the mid-1980s in a style meant to evoke old-world villas, but updated with every modern security feature money could buy. Floodlights illuminated manicured lawns. Armed men patrolled the perimeter with dogs. This wasn't a home, it was a fortress. The SUV stopped at the circular drive. Dante was out before it fully halted, moving to the first vehicle where his father was being helped out by two bodyguards. An older man in a suit, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the careful posture of someone who spent his life navigating dangerous men, rushed down the steps. Don Salvatore, thank God. We have the medical team standing by. I'm fine, Vincent. The Don waved him off irritably, but his breathing came in short gasps. Just old, just tired. You need an EKG, blood pressure check, the stress from tonight. I said I'm fine, but he wasn't. Arya could see it in the way he leaned on his cane, in the tremor of his hands. The assassination attempt had rattled him, and men his age didn't bounce back from that kind of shock. Dante turned to her. Out! She climbed from the SUV, and immediately two bodyguards materialized on either side of her. Not touching, but close enough to grab if she ran, as if she could outrun bullets and guard dogs in the 15 acres between here and the public road. The man in glasses, Vincent apparently, studied her with sharp eyes. Who is this? The waitress who saved my father's life. Dante gestured for them to follow him inside. She's staying here tonight, under protection. Protection or custody? Does it matter? They entered through double doors into a foyer that spoke of wealth without taste. Marble floors, a chandelier that belonged in a palace, oil paintings of Long Island Sound that cost more than Arya's entire life savings. Servants in black uniforms appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The whole place had the sterile perfection of a museum or a mausoleum. Put her in the East Wing, guest room 3. Dante was already moving toward a hallway. Rocco, station yourself outside her door. She doesn't leave. She doesn't make calls. Clear? The bodyguard from the first SUV, Rocco apparently, a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite, nodded once. Crystal. Wait, Arya found her voice. You can't keep me here. This is kidnapping. Dante turned back, and his expression was unreadable. You witnessed an assassination attempt on the Capo dei Capi of New York. The shooters failed, which means they'll try again, and they'll eliminate any witnesses who can identify them. Right now, this compound is the safest place in the tri-state area. You should be thanking me. For imprisoning me? For keeping you alive. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the bowels of the house, with Vincent trailing behind, already talking about damage control and police statements and who to call at City Hall. Rocco touched her elbow, gentle but firm. "This way, miss." What choice did she have? She followed him up a grand staircase, down a hallway lined with more expensive art, to a door that opened into a bedroom larger than her entire Astoria studio. Four-poster bed, antique furniture, windows overlooking the Sound, where lights from Connecticut twinkled across black water. Bathrooms through there. Clothes in the closet should fit. They belong to... Rocco paused. Someone else. "I'll have food sent up. You need anything? Knock. I'll be right outside." "Am I a prisoner?" "You're a guest. Guests can leave. Not when leaving means dying." He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't budging either. "Get some rest, miss. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." The door closed. She heard him settle into position outside. The creak of a chair, the rustle of fabric as he got comfortable for a long night's watch. Aria stood in the center of the room and tried to process the last 2 hours. She'd gone from invisible waitress to witness to, what, hostage? Protected asset? She didn't know. Couldn't think clearly through the adrenaline crash that was making her hands shake and her vision blur at the edges. The bathroom was obscenely luxurious. Marble, everything. A tub large enough to swim in. Soaps and lotions from brands she couldn't pronounce. She locked the door and stripped off the clothes that reeked of gunpowder and fear. Stood under the shower and let water hot enough to hurt wash away the sweat and the glass dust, and the feeling of Dante Marchetti's hand on her arm. When she emerged 20 minutes later, wrapped in a robe that cost more than her monthly rent, food had appeared on the bedside table. Chicken, vegetables, bread, water. She wasn't hungry but forced herself to eat because her father had taught her that soldiers ate when they could, slept when they could, because you never knew when the next opportunity would come. The clothes in the closet did fit. Jeans, sweaters, all expensive, all in her size. She tried not to think about the woman who'd owned them before. Tried not to imagine the story that ended with a closet full of clothes, waiting for someone who would never return. She should sleep, should rest while she could. But sleep felt impossible with guards outside the door and questions hammering at her skull. How long could she maintain the fiction of Aria Brennan? Dante was already suspicious. How long before he started digging? Before he found the holes in her identity, the gaps in her story, the truth she'd buried under 10 years of lies? And when he found out, when, not if, because men like Dante Marchetti didn't stop until they had answers. What would he do? Kill her, probably. Last of the Vittorio bloodline, the family his family had destroyed, loose end that needed tying off. Or maybe something worse. She pulled the silver chain from under her shirt, looked at the ring that dangled there. Leone e Rosa, the lion and rose of the Vittorio crest. Her father's ring, taken from his cooling hand while the compound still smoldered. The only thing she'd saved from the fire. "I'm sorry, Papa." The words came out a whisper. "I should have let the old man die, should have let the bullet find him. But I couldn't. I couldn't be like them." No answer came. Dead men didn't speak, no matter how much you wanted them to. She tucked the ring back under her shirt and turned off the lights. Lay in the expensive bed in the expensive room, in the home of her family's murderers, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion dragged her under. Morning came too soon. Sunlight streamed through windows she'd forgotten to close, painting the room gold and making her eyes ache. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it crashed back. The restaurant, the shooting, the drive through darkness to this place. A knock at the door. "Miss Brennan, are you awake?" Not Rocco's voice, someone older. She wrapped the robe around herself and cracked the door. An elderly man stood in the hallway, wearing a suit despite the early hour. He had kind eyes and hands that shook slightly with age. "I am Carmine, the house manager. Mr. Marchetti has requested your presence at breakfast. The library, in 15 minutes. And if I refuse? Then I will wait here while you dress, and we will walk down together in 16 minutes. The faintest smile. Either way, you are going to breakfast. She dressed in the borrowed clothes, jeans that fit too well, a cashmere sweater that felt like sin against her skin. Followed Carmine through hallways that seemed designed to confuse, past rooms she glimpsed through open doors. A gym with equipment that belonged in a professional facility. An office with enough computer monitors to run a small country. A room that was just guns, rifles and pistols and things she didn't have names for, all locked behind glass like lethal art. The library occupied the back of the house, 2 stories of books with a rolling ladder to reach the upper shelves. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sound. A fire crackled in a fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig. And at a small table set for two, Dante Marchetti waited. He'd changed clothes. Dark jeans, black sweater, hair still damp from a shower. Without the suit, he looked younger, closer to her age, almost normal if you ignored the gun in the shoulder holster he wasn't bothering to hide. "Sit, please." She sat. The table held enough food for 5 people. Eggs, bacon, toast, fruit, pastries, coffee that smelled like heaven. Her stomach reminded her that she'd barely eaten yesterday. Dante poured coffee into a china cup, slid it across to her. "Cream? Sugar?" "Black." He poured his own, took a sip, studied her over the rim like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. "My tech team worked through the night, running background on everyone at Serafina last night, cross-referencing with known associates of rival families, looking for whoever tipped off the shooters." He set down his cup. "Your name came up. Aria Marie Brennan. Social Security number 123456789. Born April 3rd, 2001, in Dayton, Ohio." Her heart tried to climb out of her throat. Interesting background. Orphaned at 2, bounced through foster care, moved to New York at 19. He pulled out a tablet, slid it across the table. "Except there's a problem." The screen showed documents, official-looking forms with government seals, and stamped across everything in red, "Invalid." That social security number belongs to a baby girl who died of SIDS in 1999. Your birth certificate fails forensic analysis. Wrong paper stock for the era, seal inconsistencies. Your driver's license is a good fake, one of the best my people have seen, but still a fake. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "Aria Brennan doesn't exist, never existed. You're a ghost." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. 10 years. 10 years of being so careful, and it had taken his people less than 12 hours to unravel her. The question is, who are you really? And why are you hiding? Every instinct screamed, "Run." But there was nowhere to go. Guards at the door, walls around the compound. And even if she somehow made it past all of that, they'd hunt her. Men like the Marchettis didn't let loose ends walk away. She had one card left to play, one truth that might save her, wrapped in enough lies to survive. "My name is Aria, that part's real, but not Brennan." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, needing something to hold. "I'm running from my ex. He was bad, violent, connect to people who could make me disappear if they found me." It was a good lie, believable, happened to women every day. Dante's expression didn't change. "Your ex, what's his name?" "I'd rather not." "His name?" Marcus Flynn." She pulled the name from thin air, gambling he wouldn't immediately check. "He works for, I don't know exactly, some kind of crew operating out of Jersey. I left 3 years ago, changed my name, disappeared. And the fighting skills, the way you moved last night? He taught me. Then I learned more on my own, at the gym where I work mornings. Figured if he ever found me, I'd need to defend myself." Dante was quiet for a long moment, assessing, deciding whether to believe her or put a bullet in her brain and dump her in the Sound. Finally, "I'm going to verify this, all of it. If you're lying, if you're working for whoever attacked my father, If you're a plant sent to infiltrate this family, it won't matter what you did last night. You'll disappear. Understand? I understand. Good. Until I'm satisfied you're telling the truth, you stay here, under guard. You don't leave the property. You don't make phone calls. You don't contact anyone. He stood. Someone will bring you lunch, dinner, whatever you need, but you're not going anywhere. How long? As long as it takes. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame, looking back. For what it's worth, I hope you're telling the truth, because you saved my father's life, and that deserves better than a bullet. Then he was gone, and she was alone with her lies and her terror, and the knowledge that the clock was ticking down to the moment when Dante Marchetti discovered exactly who she was. When he learned that the woman he was protecting was Isabella Vittorio. When the last Marchetti-Vittorio war began, the hours crawled. Isabella, she'd stopped thinking of herself as Aria the moment Dante's tech team had ripped apart her false identity, spent the first day pacing the guest room like a caged animal. 23 steps from the window to the door, 15 from the bed to the bathroom. She counted them obsessively, memorized every detail of her prison, cataloged potential weapons. The brass lamp could crack a skull. The mirror could provide glass shards sharp enough to open an artery. The window overlooked a 30-foot drop to landscape gardens, survivable if you knew how to fall. Her father had taught her how to fall. Antonio Vittorio had taught her many things in the 13 years they'd had together. How to speak the old dialect so she'd never forget where she came from. How to fight so she'd never be helpless. How to survive so his death wouldn't be the end of their bloodline. He'd prepared her for war without ever saying the word, had turned his daughter into a weapon wrapped in laughter, in Sunday dinners, in lemon trees that smelled like sunshine. And then the Marchettis had come, and all his preparation had boiled down to one lesson. Hide until they leave, then run until you can't run anymore. She'd been running for a decade. Now the running had stopped, and she was standing in the enemy's stronghold, wearing dead girl's clothes and waiting for the axe to fall. Lunch arrived at noon. Carmine again, carrying a tray with soup and bread and apologetic eyes. She forced herself to eat. Discipline her father had drilled into her bones. Dinner came at 6, the same ritual. Carmine asked if she needed anything, with the practiced courtesy of someone who'd spent his life serving dangerous men. She asked for books, and he returned with 3 novels from the library downstairs, though her eyes couldn't focus on the words long enough to read more than a page. The first night passed sleepless. Every footstep in the hallway jerked her awake. Every door closing made her reach for the knife she'd hidden under her pillow. Not the one from her sock. They'd taken that, but a butter knife from lunch that she'd sharpened against the bathroom tile until it had an edge. When dawn came, the compound lit up like a prison yard, floodlights fading as natural light took over. She watched from her window as guards patrolled with dogs, as SUVs came and went through the gate, as the machinery of organized crime conducted its business in the darkness below. The second day mirrored the first, pacing, training, waiting. The third followed the second. By the fourth morning, Isabella felt like she was dissolving, her edges blurring from lack of purpose. She did push-ups until her arms screamed, shadow-boxed until sweat soaked through her borrowed clothes. Anything to maintain the discipline that had kept her alive this long. On the 5th night, at 3 a.m., everything changed. The knock came hard and urgent. Not Carmine's polite tap, but hard knuckles against wood. The sound of urgency. Isabella was already awake, already dressed. She opened the door to find Rocco, his face grim. "You need to come with me. Now." "Where?" "Just move." The hallway was darker than usual. Emergency lighting casting everything in red. More guards than she'd seen before, positioned at intervals, weapons visible. The kind of security posture that said something had gone very wrong. Rocco led her downstairs she hadn't seen before, into the basement level where the temperature dropped 10 degrees and the walls were bare concrete. A door at the end of the hall stood open, light spilling out. Men's voices came from inside, angry and overlapping. The room beyond was windowless and spare. A metal table, folding chairs, and sprawled across the floor, zip-tied and bleeding from a cut above his eye, was a man in his 40s, balding, soft around the middle, wearing the remains of an expensive suit that someone had clearly roughed him up in. Dante stood over him. Vincent, the man with glasses from the first night, sat at the table with a laptop open. Don Salvatore occupied the only comfortable chair, looking frailer than he had 5 days ago, but still radiating authority like nuclear heat. Miss Brennan. Vincent gestured to an empty chair. Please, sit. She sat, kept her hands visible, tried to project calm while her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Do you know this man? Dante crouched beside the prisoner, grabbed his hair, forced his face toward Isabella. She looked, really looked. The features were vaguely familiar, in the way that faces sometimes are when you've seen them in passing, but she couldn't place him. No, should I? His name is Anthony Romano, capo in my father's organization for 20 years. Last night he tried to hire another assassin to finish what the first one failed to do. Dante's voice was cold, conversational, the tone of someone discussing weather instead of murder. Before that, he hired the sniper who shot up Serafina, the one you saved my father from. The man, Romano, spat blood onto the concrete. Fuck you, Dante. I did what needed doing. Your father's weak, old. Getting him killed before he drags us all down was mercy. Mercy. Don Salvatore's voice cracked like a whip. You worked for me for 2 decades, Anthony. I trusted you with my life, my family, and you repay that trust with betrayal? I repay stupidity with pragmatism. The Calabrese family offered real partnership, equal split of the port operations. But you're too stuck in the past to see the future. Vincent tapped his laptop screen. We traced the Bitcoin payments, 50,000 to the first shooter, another 100,000 deposited 3 days ago for a second attempt, all coming from an account linked to shell companies owned by, let me guess, Dante straightened, Calabrese front corporations. Not exactly. Vincent turned the laptop to show them. The money originated from Calabrese accounts, yes, but it was routed through a middleman. Someone inside our organization who's been facilitating the partnership. Who? Don Salvatore's hands gripped his cane until his knuckles whitened. Frank Russo, my cousin. Vincent's voice cracked on the words. He's been working with Calabrese for months, using Romano as a cutout to maintain deniability. The silence that followed was terrible. Isabella watched emotions flicker across Vincent's face. Shame, rage, grief. Betrayal by blood was worse than betrayal by stranger. It meant the rot had reached deep, had infected the foundation. Don Salvatore spoke quietly. Where is Frank now? Unknown. He hasn't been seen since the Serafina attack. We've checked his apartment in Tribeca, his office in Midtown. Nothing. He has a weekend house, Romano laughed, the sound wet with blood, up in the Catskills, near the old Vittorio compound ruins. Bought it 3 years ago, said it was an investment property. But I think he liked the symbolism, building on top of dead enemies. Isabella's chest constricted. The compound, her home. Someone had built a house near the ashes of her childhood and called it symbolism. Dante must have seen something in her face. You recognize the location? She had to be careful here. One wrong word would unravel everything. I've heard of the Vittorio family. Everyone in New York has. They were wiped out 10 years ago, right? 11 years this October. Don Salvatore watched her with those black eyes that missed nothing. We burned their compound to the ground, ended their bloodline, ancient history now. 11 years, not 10. Isabella's birthday, July 14th, 2002, meant the massacre had happened when she was 13, not 12. They didn't even remember the details correctly, had killed her entire family, and couldn't be bothered to keep the date straight. The rage that swept through her was white-hot and blinding. She forced it down, buried it deep where it couldn't show on her face. Later. She could rage later, when she wasn't surrounded by the men who'd pulled the trigger. "Why am I here?" She kept her voice level. "What does this have to do with me?" "You witnessed the assassination attempt." Dante pulled up a chair, sat backward on it with his arms crossed over the back. "Romano hired the shooter, but Frank Russo coordinated everything. He's the real threat, and he's gone to ground. So find him. We're trying. But in the meantime, I need to know if you saw anything that night. Anything that could help us identify other conspirators. Anyone unusual in the restaurant before the attack. Any conversations you overheard." Isabella thought back. The chaos before the Marchettis arrived. Giancarlo's panic. Chef Massimo's tyranny in the kitchen. The other servers, the line cooks, the customers who'd scattered when gunfire erupted. There was a man. The memory surfaced slowly. Ground floor, corner table. He was alone. Kept checking his watch like he was waiting for something. He wore a gray suit that didn't fit right, too bulky around the chest. Dante leaned forward. Description? White, maybe late 40s, thinning hair, brown, average height. The suit was off the rack, Men's Warehouse maybe, but the bulkiness wasn't fat. Looked more like body armor. Dante's eyes gleamed. He expected return fire. Where did he go when the shooting started? Toward the stairs, your stairs, to the VIP section. One of your men, the one with the scar, shot him. 2 rounds to the chest. Romano. Don Salvatore turned his gaze to the man on the floor. The decoy. You shot him yourself to prevent him talking. He was expendable. Romano's voice held no remorse. Knew too much. Loose ends get you killed. Ironic advice from a dead man. Dante stood. Rocco, take him to the basement, the real basement. Make sure he's comfortable while we decide what to do with him. 2 guards hauled Romano to his feet. He went without fighting, his face resigned. He knew what basement meant. Knew comfortable was euphemism for interrogation. Knew he'd probably never see daylight again. As they dragged him past Isabella, his eyes met hers, and something flickered there. Recognition? No, impossible. He'd never seen her before. But the way he looked at her, like he was trying to place her face against some half-forgotten memory. Then he was gone, and the door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. Vincent closed his laptop. We have teams searching the Catskills house. If Frank's there, we'll know by morning. And if he's not? Don Salvatore's voice was tired. The assassination attempt had aged him, carved new lines into his face. If he's already run to Boston, to Calabrese protection, then we have a war. Dante's jaw tightened. Full mobilization. Lock down the ports, the unions, everything. Show Calabrese that coming after us costs more than they're willing to pay. Wars are expensive, in money and blood. So is looking weak. Father and son stared at each other across the metal table, decades of complicated history flowing between them. Isabella watched the dynamic play out, Don Salvatore's age and caution versus Dante's youth and hunger for action. The eternal tension between the generation that built the empire and the generation that had to maintain it. Finally, Don Salvatore nodded. Make the calls, mobilize the crews, but I want Frank Russo brought to me alive. He answers for this betrayal in person. Understood. Dante turned to Isabella. You should get some rest. Tomorrow might be, I want to help. The words escaped before she could stop them. Insane words. Suicidal words. But sitting in that guest room for another day while men hunted the traitor felt impossible. She needed to move, to act, to do something other than wait for Dante's tech team to uncover the next layer of lies. Dante studied her face. Help how? You said Frank's house is near the old Vittorio compound. I know the Catskills. Spent summers up there as a kid. A dangerous admission, but threaded with enough truth to be believable. The terrain, the back roads. If he runs, he'll need routes the GPS won't show. Routes locals use. It was weak, transparent, but desperation made people believe what they wanted to believe. And right now, Dante wanted to believe he had every advantage. You're a waitress from Queens. What do you know about tactical operations? I know how to survive. You saw that yourself. She met his eyes, held his gaze. And I owe you for protecting me these past 5 days, for not throwing me to the cops. Let me pay that debt. Vincent looked skeptical. Dante, this is a bad idea. She's a civilian, untested, a liability. She saved my father's life when trained bodyguards failed. She saw details about the decoy no one else noticed. And she's right. If Frank runs, local knowledge matters. Dante's expression was unreadable. She comes, but under strict supervision, Rocco's team. If she so much as breathes wrong, you pull her. Boss, that's final. Vincent's jaw worked, but he nodded, closed his laptop with more force than necessary. I'll coordinate with the Catskills team. We move at 0600. Don Salvatore raised a hand. Before you go, Vincent, the girl, what did your deeper background check reveal? Isabella's heart stopped. Vincent glanced at her, then back to the Don. The ex-boyfriend's story checks out. Marcus Flynn, known associate of a crew operating out of Jersey City. History of domestic violence arrests, though nothing stuck. Last known location was Philadelphia, 2 years ago. He's on our watch list now, in case he surfaces. She could breathe again. They'd bought it. The lie had held under scrutiny because she'd built it carefully. Had woven enough truth. Flynn was a real person. The Jersey crew existed. That verification would find what they expected. But Don Salvatore's eyes remained sharp. And her real name? If Aria Brennan is fake? Still working on that. The identity she's using is high-quality work. Whoever created it knew what they were doing. But we'll crack it eventually. These things take time. See that you do. I don't like mysteries in my house. He stood with effort, leaning heavily on his cane. Age and stress had stolen something vital from him over the past 5 days. The man who'd walked into Serafina, radiating power, now looked diminished, mortal. Miss Brennan, you saved my life. For that you have my gratitude and my protection. But understand, gratitude has limits. If you betray us, if you're working for enemies we haven't identified yet, your death will be slow. Am I clear? Crystal. Good. Now get some rest. Tomorrow you earn your keep. He shuffled out, guards flanking him like Secret Service around a president. Vincent followed, already on his phone, coordinating logistics. The room emptied until only Dante and Isabella remained. You're lying to me, he spoke quietly, without accusation. Simple statement of fact. About what? I don't know yet, but you are. He moved closer, invading her space in a way that should have felt threatening, but somehow didn't. The way you move, the way you think, the skills you have, none of it fits the story you're selling. Everyone has secrets. True, but most people's secrets don't include hand-to-hand combat training and the ability to spot tactical body armor in a crowded restaurant. His hand came up, fingers ghosting near her face without touching. I'll figure you out eventually. Question is whether you come clean first or whether I have to drag the truth out of you. She should step back, create distance. But something kept her frozen in place, caught in his gravity. And if the truth is worse than you imagine, then we'll deal with it, together or not, your choice. The word together hung between them, weighted with implications neither could acknowledge. Enemy and victim, killer and orphan, the son who'd pulled the trigger and the daughter who'd survived the bullet. If he knew, there would be no together. There would only be blood. Isabella stepped back, broke the moment. I should sleep, early morning. Yeah, you should. But he didn't move. For what it's worth, I hope I'm wrong about you. I hope you're exactly what you claim to be. Just a girl who got caught in the crossfire and deserves a second chance. But you don't believe that? No, I don't. He left her standing in the interrogation room with its metal table and bloodstains on the concrete, with the weight of his suspicion pressing down like a physical thing, with the knowledge that every hour she spent in this house brought her closer to exposure. She made her way back to the guest room. Rocco had returned to his post outside her door, nodded as she passed. The room felt smaller now, more suffocating. She'd pushed for this, insisted on joining the hunt for Frank Russo, because sitting still meant dying slowly. Now she had what she'd asked for, a chance to leave the compound, to see the ruins of her childhood home, to hunt the man who dared to build his weekend retreat on the ashes of her family. She pulled out the silver chain, looked at the ring one more time in the darkness. Leone e Rosa, Lion and Rose. The Vittorio crest that marked her as something she could never escape. Tomorrow she'd return to Dutchess County, to the compound where her parents had died, to the ground soaked with Vittorio blood. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to make the Marchettis pay for every drop. The helicopter lifted off at 6:15, rotors beating the October air into submission. Isabella sat between Rocco and another guard, watching Long Island fall away beneath them. Dante occupied the co-pilot seat, headset on, speaking in clipped sentences to someone on the ground. 3 SUVs were already en route by road, carrying the rest of the team. The helicopter would get them there faster, give them aerial reconnaissance before they moved in. The flight north traced the Hudson River, that ancient highway that had carried Dutch traders and British warships and generations of dreamers toward futures they'd never reach. Below, the suburbs gave way to forest. The cities thinned to towns. By the time they crossed into Dutchess County, civilization had become a suggestion rather than a certainty. Isabella knew these mountains, had learned their rhythms during summers when her father would take her hiking, teaching her to read the landscape like a map. Which ridges provided cover, which valleys funneled sound, where the seasonal streams ran and the deer trails cut through the brush. Knowledge meant for lazy afternoons had become survival skills the night she'd use them to escape burning ruins. The pilot's voice crackled through the headsets. LZ coming up, 2 minutes. Dante twisted in his seat. Rocco, secure the perimeter first. Standard sweep. Marco, you're with me on point. Miss Brennan, I know. Stay back. Don't touch anything. Be invisible. Actually, I was going to say, stay close. You know the terrain. I might need that knowledge. The helicopter descended toward a clearing a half-mile from Frank Russo's coordinates. Trees bent under rotor wash. Dust and dead leaves spiraled into the air. The skids touched earth, and immediately Rocco was out, weapon up, scanning the tree line. The other guard, Marco, built like a tank, followed, moving with surprising grace for his size. Isabella dropped to the ground, instinctively crouching low despite the helicopter's bulk providing cover. The air here tasted different from the city. Pine and earth, and something underneath that might have been memory or might have been grief. She was close now, so close to the place where everything had ended and everything had begun. Dante appeared at her elbow. Which direction? She oriented herself by the sun, by the shape of the mountains against the sky. Pointed northeast. That way, maybe 10 minutes on foot through the woods. There's an old logging road that'll get vehicles closer, but it curves around. Faster to cut straight through. Lead the way. I'm not trained for... You're the most trained person here who isn't carrying a gun. Move. She moved. Into the trees where sunlight filtered through bare branches, and the ground was soft with fallen needles. Rocco and Marco flanked them, weapons ready, eyes constantly scanning. Dante stayed close enough that she could hear his breathing, could feel the heat radiating from him despite the October chill. The forest was different from how she remembered. Smaller somehow, the trees less mythic. Or maybe she'd grown, and childhood memories always exaggerated scale. She found herself navigating by instinct more than conscious thought, left at the split oak, right where the granite outcropping broke through the soil, straight through the clearing where deer had bedded down in the grass. And then she saw it. The compound had been large once, 20 buildings spread across 200 acres. Main house, guest cottages, barns, workshops, the stone chapel her great-grandfather had built by hand in 1952. Now it was rubble, blackened timbers jutting from the ground like broken teeth, foundations filled with ash and debris, nature reclaiming what fire had destroyed, vines crawling over collapsed walls, saplings pushing through charred floorboards. Isabella stopped at the tree line, couldn't make her feet carry her forward into that graveyard. Dante studied the ruins. "This is the Vittorio compound?" "Was." Her voice came out steady despite the earthquake in her chest. 11 years ago this October, you said. "They're all gone now." "Yeah, they are." Something in his tone made her look at him. His expression was carefully neutral, but his jaw was tight. Guilt? Regret? Hard to read. It was war, ugly business. Was it necessary? The question escaped before she could stop it. Burning it all? Killing everyone? Orders are orders. And the Vittorios had been a thorn in my father's side for 40 years. Sometimes you cut out the thorn, even if it hurts. He turned away from the ruins, jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't spit out. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I was 18, first real operation, wanted to prove I was ready." A pause. Didn't ask enough questions about who'd be inside. Such casual brutality, such practiced indifference to the lives he'd ended. Isabella wanted to scream at him, wanted to claw at his face until she drew blood, wanted to tell him that his thorn had been her father, his necessary war had been her childhood ending in fire and screaming. Instead, she said nothing, let the moment pass, focused on breathing until the rage subsided. Rocco's voice crackled through Dante's radio. "Boss, I've got visual on the target property, 300 yards north of your position. Single-story structure, modern construction, no vehicles visible, no movement, could be empty. Copy, hold position, we're coming to you." They circled the ruins, giving the compound a wide berth. Isabella risked one last look back at what used to be home, at the foundation of the main house where her bedroom had been on the second floor, at the remains of the stone chapel where her grandmother was buried, at the grove where lemon trees had grown from seeds carried across an ocean. All of it gone, reduced to ash and memory, but she was still here, the last Vittorio, the thorn they'd missed. And thorns, when left in flesh long enough, could fester and poison and kill. Frank Russo's house sat in a clearing carved from forest, all glass and steel and architectural pretension. Modern design that screamed money without taste. Solar panels on the roof, a deck overlooking the valley, windows that reflected the sky like blank eyes. And between the ruins and this monument to the future, maybe 300 yards, lay the ground where Isabella's family had bled. Symbolism, Romano had called it, building on top of dead enemies. She was going to burn it to the ground. Rocco and Marco had taken positions flanking the approach, using trees for cover. Dante crouched behind a fallen log, binoculars to his eyes. No heat signature, no movement. Either it's empty or someone's very good at hiding. "Want me to knock?" Isabella kept her voice light, despite the hatred boiling in her gut. "Want you to stay here while we clear it." He lowered the binoculars, keyed his radio. All units were going in, standard breach protocol, watch for traps. The team moved with practiced efficiency. Marco approached the front door, tested the handle, locked. A few seconds with a pick gun and it swung open. He entered, weapon raised. Rocco followed. Dante went third, leaving Isabella crouched behind the log with her pulse hammering. Minutes passed. Each one stretched longer than the last. She strained to hear through the trees, voices, gunfire, anything, but only silence came back. Finally, Dante's voice from the radio Rocco had given her. Clear, it's empty, but you need to see this. She approached the house carefully, scanning windows for threats even though Dante had said clear. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Expensive furniture, abstract art on the walls, a kitchen with appliances that cost more than cars. Isabella had spent 10 years building walls around her grief, brick by brick, lie by lie, until the fortress seemed impenetrable. She'd walked past her parents' favorite restaurant without flinching, had heard the name Vittorio spoken by strangers and kept her face blank, had become so good at compartmentalizing that she almost believed the pain had faded. But some walls, when faced with the right pressure, didn't crack. They shattered. What mattered was the back wall. It was covered in photographs, crime scene photos, surveillance shots, newspaper clippings, all arranged like a shrine or a case file or a serial killer's trophy wall. And every single image was of the Vittorio family. Her father shaking hands with a politician, dated 2012. Her mother at a charity gala, 2013. The compound before the fire, aerial shots showing every building. The compound after, still smoldering, body bags being carried out by county coroners. And in the center, larger than the rest, a family portrait from Christmas 2014. Antonio, Juliana, and 13-year-old Isabella, all smiling at the camera. The last photo ever taken of them together. Someone had drawn a red X over her parents' faces. Isabella's vision tunneled. Blood roared in her ears. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the rage that was trying to claw its way out of her throat as a scream. Jesus Christ! Dante stood beside her, staring at the wall. Frank was obsessed. This is sick. The word came out flat, dead. This is sick. More than that, it's evidence. He pulled out his phone, started photographing. His father, Vincent's uncle, worked for the Vittorios before flipping to us in '96. Frank grew up resenting both families, blamed the Vittorios for his father's weakness, blamed us for corrupting him. He's been planning this for years, using Romano, using Calabrese connections, trying to destroy both organizations so he could. He stopped, went very still. Isabella followed his gaze to the corner of the wall, to a document pinned there. A birth certificate, State of New York. Isabella Marie Vittorio, born July 14th, 2002, Bronx, New York. Parents, Antonio Vittorio and Juliana Romano Vittorio. And written across it in red marker, survivor, location unknown, priority, target. Dante turned to her slowly. Isabella. She couldn't run, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything but stand there as her carefully constructed lies collapsed like the compound burning all over again. Your real name is Isabella Vittorio. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in a voice gone cold and distant. You're not running from an ex. You're the daughter of Antonio Vittorio, the girl who survived the fire, the last of their bloodline. Dante, I led the raid that killed your parents. I gave the order to burn the compound. His hand moved toward his gun, not drawing, just resting there. You saved my father knowing I'd murdered yours. Why? The answer came from somewhere deep and honest, bypassing every filter she'd built. Because watching an old man die from a coward's bullet would have made me like you, and I refuse to be like you. The slap of words hung between them. Truth and accusation and grief all tangled together. You should have let me die in that fire. Her voice broke. You should have checked the cellar, should have found me, should have finished what you started. I didn't know you were there. Intelligence said, I don't care what intelligence said. You killed my family. You burned my home. You took everything. The scream finally tore free, raw and primal. And now you stand here in this house built on their graves and ask me why I saved you? Why did you? Because I'm better than you. Because revenge is poison, and I won't let it turn me into a monster. Tears streamed down her face now, hot and bitter. Because my father taught me that honor matters more than hatred, and assassination is the weapon of cowards. And maybe I wanted to prove that one Vittorio could be stronger than all the Marchettis combined. Dante stared at her. She waited for the gun to come up, for the bullet that would end the last chapter of the Vittorio story. Instead, he holstered his weapon completely, raised his hands, stepped back. I'm sorry. 2 words, inadequate and insufficient, but spoken with something that sounded almost like genuine remorse. Sorry doesn't resurrect the dead. No, it doesn't. He ran a hand through his hair. I was 18, trying to prove myself to my father, trying to become the man he needed me to be. The raid was my initiation, my test. I was told the compound housed soldiers and associates, that it was a legitimate military target. I was told wrong, or lied to, or, does it matter? They're still dead. No, it doesn't matter. You're right. He looked at the wall of photographs, at her family's faces marked for death. What matters is what happens now. You could kill me. You'd probably succeed. You're fast enough, well-trained enough. Rocco and Marco would gun you down afterward, but you'd have your revenge. Is that what you want? Permission to execute me? I want you to choose for yourself. Revenge or something else. Hatred or, I don't even know. Peace? Closure? Whatever lets you sleep at night without seeing their faces. Isabella looked at the family portrait, at her mother's smile, her father's hand on her shoulder. At 13-year-old Bella, who had no idea that in 2 months her world would end in fire. I don't want revenge. The words tasted like ash. I want them back. I want my father teaching me to plant lemon trees. I want my mother singing in the kitchen. I want to be normal and safe and loved instead of alone and hunted and terrified. But I can't have that. So what I want doesn't matter. She turned away from the wall, from the past, from the girl she'd been. Frank Russo built this shrine to my family's death. He's been hunting me. He tried to kill your father. He's the real enemy. Not you, not me, him. So we take him down, together. Together implies partnership, equals working toward common goal. We're not equals, Dante. We're predator and prey in a temporary truce. Then let's make it permanent. Let me help you. Let me... Rocco's voice crackled through the radio, urgent and sharp. Boss, we've got movement. Vehicle approaching from the west, coming fast. Could be our guy. Dante's entire demeanor shifted, from emotional to tactical in a heartbeat. Copy. Set up ambush positions. Do not engage until I give the word. We want him alive. He looked at Isabella. This isn't over. But right now we hunt. She wiped her eyes, drew herself up, became what her father had trained her to be. Let's finish this. They moved.